Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
My name is Mel Goldberg. I was born and brought up in the Bronx. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 41, I was at college. I was a senior at CCNY, and nobody knew where Pearl Harbor was. At any rate, after that, I got a call from the Office of War Information. Would I like a job there? Well, if they would let me continue school, that was fine, and that's what they did. I kept at the OWI until I enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps in December 1942. From there, they sent me to Atlantic City for basic training, and then to Michigan State College pre-cadet. At Michigan, we stayed there 2 months, and then they sent us to San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center. There, they gave us various tests, physical, mental, and psychological, to find out which specialty to which I should be assigned. Eventually, they wound up at navigation, and from there, they sent us to San Marcos, to aviation school. Graduated from San Marcos on February 5th, 1944, on my 21st birthday. At that time, I got my wings, and I got a commission as a second lieutenant. From San Marcos, we had a few weeks off, and then sent to El Paso, Texas, where I was to meet the other members of the crew and the new plane that we were going to fly, the B-24 Liberator. A B-24 is a large plane. It usually has a bigger capacity for bombs than the B-17, which is more famous. And it also has a larger range. From El Paso, we finally finished there. They felt we were good enough to go. They sent us to Topeka, Kansas for assignment overseas. At Topeka, my mother and father and brother came out to see us off, and my bombardier's mother and sister also came. At that point, they're supposed to tell us where we're going to go. So on Mother's Day, 1944, we took off to go overseas. Our first flight was to Goose Bay, Labrador. We stayed there overnight and then flew almost 6 hours from there to Iceland. We stayed in Iceland 5 days because of bad weather. And finally, we left to go down to Prestwick, Scotland, but they changed it in mid-flight to North Ireland. On the way down, I was following a radio beam and my regular compass, and somehow or other, following the radio beam, we were being pulled over toward the east, and I couldn't understand it. I kept correcting Mac, our pilot, to go to the right a little bit more and do my compass reading rather than the radio. When we landed in Ireland, I found out the Germans were able to bend the radio beam so that if the plane went on that alone, it would wind up in Germany. And many planes did. But that, it's a little bit scary. We were then sent to England. Our base was in Halesworth, which is in the east northeast part of England, north of London. We were there. We flew for a few days to learn how to fly in close formation. Our first mission was June 16th. The night before, we had heard an engine going over and then a big crash. Didn't know what it was, thought it might be an airplane. The following morning on the 16th, we were told we were going to be bombing the site of the V-1, the buzz bombs. That is what happened the night before. Now, the buzz bomb is something that was supposed to terrorize the British. The Germans set it off. It's really a flying torpedo. It has an engine and this big torpedo-like bomb, and you can see it flying over, and suddenly the sound stops and the bomb drops. The silence, it tells you it's dropping, but you don't know where it's going. All you know, it's coming down. It is really scary. But at any rate, we went out to hit that site. When we finished our first mission, we were feeling very good. At least we had finished one, and we only had 24 to go because 25 was what they called a tour at that time. From there, we went to other missions and then went to Munich. Now, Munich we went twice. Once we hit a marshalling yard, and the other time it was an airfield. But Munich is quite a distance. And on the second flight, we lost an engine at the target. We dropped our bombs and lost an engine. Now, at that point, we're quite a distance from England. And Mac, our pilot, said, Mel, give me a heading for Switzerland. Now, if you're going to Switzerland, you have to know that they have an airfield there that you have to go to. You'd have to put your landing gear down and fire green flares so that you know you're going there. And then the Germans had built the base right on their border, which is exactly the same as the Swiss base. So if you didn't know it right, you were going to hit the wrong base and wind up in German hands. At any rate, after saying that, Max said, Mel, do you think we can make it back? Well, I had to consider the fuel that we had remaining, going on 3 engines, and the trip we were going to make, and the evasive action we would probably have to do. And I thought we could. And then Mac asked the rest of the crew, and they all said, let's do it. So they all agreed, and we started back alone, no fighter escort, and luckily, no German planes attacked us. But as we're approaching the border of Germany to France, you see a little puff of black smoke in front of us. So there was one ACAC, one anti-aircraft battery waiting for us. At that point, I told Mac to make an evasive action and go to the right about 45 degrees so that if we had gone straight ahead, as we were, they would have had our range, they would have had us. And so we kept doing back and forth like ducks in a shooting gallery until we finally made it back to base. And that was a happy time. One other mission that I remember distinctly is Hamburg. Now, Hamburg was, we were supposed to hit the dockyards and the marshalling yards there. And while we were flying over, that flak was intense. Now, you have to understand, flak is from an 88 gun that the Germans had, which is probably the best they ever had. They used it for infantry and anti-tank as well as for aircraft. It could reach up to 25,000 feet. But when we were flying, and we knew we were going into that flak, we had what we called aluminum foil. Originally, I thought it was for a party or something, but it turned out they call it chaff. And our waist gunners would throw it out of the back, out of their windows. It was designed to block the radar that the Germans had. We didn't have the radar, but they did. And it blocked the radar so they couldn't distinguish the airplanes because of the aluminum foil that was coming down. At any rate, going into this black puff, which takes about 20 to 30 minutes of non-evasive action going right through to the target. And you have to go into that black flak no matter what. And as we're going in, my pilot suddenly yells, "Jump, fellas, jump!" And I immediately have my chute. I'm ready to take my bombardier out of the nose turret to go down. And my co-pilot says, "Not us, fellas, it's Osborne." My pilot didn't know he was on intercom. Osborne was the pilot on the plane next to ours, which had just been hit and was going down. And Mac was telling them to jump. Well, I collapsed on the floor. I couldn't move. But we got through Hamburg and came back. Then they raised the missions again to 30, and then finally we get to Cologne. Now at that point, Cologne was our 32nd mission on October 14th, 1944. The first mission there, we were hitting a marshalling yard, and our elevator tab didn't work. It broke, so we had to come back alone. But no problems at all, really, except for the tab, which makes it difficult to steer the plane and keep it afloat. The second mission, the following day, was Cologne again. And again, all hell broke loose this time. They hit us with everything. It was the heaviest flak I've ever had. We went in there for 25 minutes, and it was horror. And the plane got hit. Our radio operator got hit in both legs. The plane was a sieve. It was leaking. But we came back alone again, and this time we had to shoot up flares, red flares, because we had a wounded man aboard. We landed. The place was leaking. As we landed, one of the pieces of flak came out in the bomb bay, and all the fluid came out. I think it was fuel, but I'm not sure. It could have been hydraulic fluid as well. But at any rate, we landed. We had very little left for the brakes, and we had to just steer off. We couldn't land with everybody else. We went into a hard stand, and stopped there, and just waited. And the ambulance came, took our radio operator away. And he was all right, though. He just hit in both legs. But that was the mission. The following day we were off, but on the 17th of October, that was our 34th mission. That was the last, because they said if we flew 32 and they just raised it to 35, we can get away. They'll give us one off. So they let us go at 34 missions. The last mission we went, we just felt they were out to get us. My bombardier and I both got up and said that. But we went through, and there was no problem, no flak, relatively speaking. Came back, flew by ourselves this time. We didn't go near anybody. We weren't taking any chances. We landed by ourselves. We kissed the ground when we landed, and that was the greatest thing. And then subsequently, we got General Timberlake gave me a medal for a Distinguished Flying Cross. The whole crew got medals. I have to tell you, we knew who we were fighting. We were fighting Hitler. We were fighting Japan. In Iraq and Afghanistan, you don't know who you're fighting. And I feel sorry for those guys.
My name is Saul M. Sachs. In the United States Army, which I served for about 3.5 years, my final rank when I was discharged was a captain in the United States Army Dental Corps. Today I would like to talk about 3 experiences and try to make them concise because they were sort of death-threatening circumstances that I was involved in. In early December, and all takes in a period of about 3 weeks. In early December 1944, I was in London on a 2-day pass, and I was staying in a lovely hotel in a fashionable neighborhood recommended by the Red Cross, with a buddy of mine. I was in the 199th General Hospital at that time, and we were staging in a little town called Chester, not such a small town. And this was to be my final 2-day pass. On the Sunday morning of that weekend, I was luxuriating in a beautiful old antique bathtub in this residence that I was in. All of a sudden, there was a tremendous blast, and water started pouring out of the tub onto the floor, and then I saw cracks on the wall, and I got a little nervous, and I had a roommate also. I jumped out of the tub, wrapped the towel around my waist, followed by my roommate, and we rushed out into the hall. The old-fashioned iron elevator was not working. Just then, somebody shouted up from downstairs and saying, "The stairs are safe to traverse." What had happened? Soon I learned that a V-2 rocket, the most sophisticated weapon that the Germans had at that time, because they were losing the war in Europe, they were pushing everything. And this rocket was very sophisticated. It could leave the English Channel on the French side, and in 4 seconds at 3,500 miles per hour, could drop down. Couldn't be spotted in the air, and in flight you couldn't see it either. This is what had happened. And the tops of the nearby buildings on the next block and further around, all around us, were sheared off, and people were climbing on their floors, or if they could, they would stand up and they would rush out of the buildings, and the streets were splattered with blood. We saw a man, my roommate and I, saw a man trying to come out of a building about a block away, hopping on one leg and holding on to the wall. So we rushed over to help him, and we saw that one whole leg, I believe it was the left leg, was off and is up to the knee, which was bleeding very profusely. One of us immediately took out a handkerchief or 2 handkerchiefs and put some pressure on the knee to stop the bleeding. We took him under each of our arms, and we brought him over to the nearest aid station. And it was amazing how the medics there took care of him so well. About an hour later, we had to get back. We had to go back in to get dressed, and we had to go back to where we were in Chester, make a train and so forth. And I saw a bent old lady walking around the streets, and I approached her and I said, "Madam," I said, "how can you tolerate all these bombs that were broken? First the regular bombs, then the V1s, and then the V2. And she says, "Sir, it is useless to worry. If the doodle bug is going to get you and has its number on you, has its number on it, we can do nothing." They were very stoic people, the British. They withstood this bombing for 5 years. We left this place called Etretat, and the Battle of the Bulge, or the Ardennes forest, was going on. And we were heading that way. I was with a general hospital, and we were heading that way, but there was too much action there. And while we were in Etretat, we found out that the Germans were dropping parachutes around us. It was another worry that we had. But then we got put into a boxcar called the 40-8, which was used in World War I. There used to be 8 horses and 40 men, but we didn't have the horses, fortunately. On the other hand, it might have been good to have them, would have been warmer. We had 35 men. I was the platoon leader at the time. I was a 2nd lieutenant. No, excuse me, my memory, I was a 1st lieutenant. When I graduated from dental school, I was a 1st lieutenant. And we were laying over in the Versailles, outside of Paris, the Versailles railroad yards, when all of a sudden, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard a tremendous blast, and then a lot of shaking of the earth, just as if it was a tremor in an earthquake. And all the men started to jump out of the cars. The Germans, the Luftwaffe, had just dropped 2 bombs on 2 hospital trains. And I saw fear in people's eyes that I never had seen before. The men jumped out, got on their knees, kissed their crosses, kissed their rosary beads, and prayed to the Lord that they were spared. One of the young men lost it, and he kept running around in circles and looking up at the sky and says, "You fucking German bastards, didn't you know that this was a hospital train? You dirty son of a bitches, didn't you know we weren't even going towards the front?" He said, "There's nothing sacred anymore. They're shooting at hospital trains now." Well, he went berserk. He rolled around on the ground and everything. And I, as the junior officer in charge, I said, "Bring him back in here." They carried him back. We put him down on covered him with a blanket. He was 19 years of age. This is my story that I wanted to tell of this 3 weeks that occurred to me when I met some life-threatening situations. I have recently written a memoir, and it's called Lucky in War and Lucky in Love. And the incidents I have just discussed will give you an idea of how lucky I was. But aside from being lucky in that way, I was also lucky because I took a lot of steps. I did a lot of things in the Army that I never would have done in civilian life.
I'm Jacob Boltino. I live in Great Neck, New York. I was a PFC in the Army. That's the highest rank I ever got. I was wounded on May 2nd, 1945, almost at the end of the war, the European War. And we were at Belady Pass. Well, we're advancing to Belady Pass. And I was firing my rifle at the time I was hit, and a bullet struck my arm, went through my chest, out my back. I howled for the medics, nobody came.